She traded herself for protection from the ruthless gang hunting her. But the Modoc warrior offered her something no white man ever had: true safety and a love that would defy two worlds. The October wind carried the scent of death across the northern California wilderness, whipping through the towering pines and sending dried leaves spiraling into the gathering dusk. In the distance, smoke rose from the smoldering remains of what had once been the Ashford family homestead. Now nothing more than blackened timber and broken dreams scattered across the valley floor.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
The year was 1873, and the Modoc War had left scars on the land that would never fully heal. But tonight, a different kind of war was about to begin. Luna Ashford pressed herself deeper into the rocky outcropping, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as she listened to the approaching hoofbeats. Her once elegant traveling dress, now torn and stained with mud and blood, clung to her trembling frame like a burial shroud. The pearl buttons that had once adorned the bodice were either missing or hanging by threads, and the intricate lacework her mother had sewn with such pride was now nothing more than tattered remnants of a life that seemed as distant as the stars overhead. 3 weeks had passed since the Garrett gang had descended upon her family's ranch like a plague of locusts. 3 weeks since she had watched her father and brother die defending their home. 3 weeks since she had become the hunted rather than the hunter in this deadly game of survival. The sound of men's voices drifted through the night air, harsh and guttural, filled with the kind of cruelty that came from hearts long since turned to stone. "She can't have gone far," growled a voice she recognized as belonging to Jake Garrett, the gang's leader and the man who had put a bullet through her father's heart without so much as blinking an eye. "Trail's fresh, and she's got nowhere to run. These mountains will be her grave if the cold don't get her first." His laughter was like the sound of breaking glass, sharp and cutting, and Luna felt her blood turn to ice water in her veins. She had been running for days, surviving on nothing but wild berries and stream water, her feet bloody and raw from the endless trek through the unforgiving wilderness. Her father's words echoed in her mind like a prayer. "If anything happens to us, Luna, you run. You run and you don't look back, you hear me? There's nothing left for you here but death." The hoofbeats grew closer, and Luna could make out the silhouettes of at least 6 riders moving through the trees below her hiding place. She recognized them all from that terrible night when they had come calling with their guns and their greed, demanding the deed to her family's land and the location of the silver mine her father had discovered in the nearby hills. Marcus Garrett, Jake's younger brother, had been the one to set fire to the barn where her brother had tried to make his final stand. Samuel Snake Morrison had been the one to drag her mother from the burning house, his hands rough and demanding, as he had whispered terrible promises in her ear before her father's rifle had found its mark. The rest of the gang was equally vile, men who had long since abandoned any pretense of decency in favor of the quick profit and the easy kill. "Check them rocks up there," Jake called out, his voice carrying easily through the still night air. "Little bird's got to be hiding somewhere close. Can't have gotten far on foot, especially not dressed like some fancy lady from back east. These mountains ain't forgiving to city folk." Luna's heart hammered against her ribs as she heard the jingle of spurs and the scrape of boots against stone. They were climbing toward her hiding place, and she knew with absolute certainty that if they found her, death would be a mercy compared to what they had planned. She had seen the look in their eyes that night, had heard the promises they had made to each other while they thought she was unconscious beneath the bodies of her family. They wanted more than just her father's land and his silver mine. They wanted her, and they would take her piece by piece until there was nothing left but broken bones and shattered dreams. The moon emerged from behind a bank of clouds, casting everything in silver light and making the shadows dance like demons. Around her feet, Luna could see them now, 3 men picking their way carefully up the rocky slope, their rifles glinting in the pale light like the fangs of hunting wolves. She had her father's derringer hidden in the folds of her dress, but it held only 2 bullets, and she knew with grim certainty that when the time came, she would save the last one for herself. Death was preferable to the alternative, and she had made her peace with that particular truth during the long cold nights of her flight through the wilderness. Her mother had always said that a lady must be prepared for any eventuality, and Luna had never imagined that such preparation would include choosing the manner of her own death. "Found something here," called out one of the men, his voice thick with excitement and anticipation. "Looks like fabric caught on this here branch. She's been through this way, all right. Can't be far now." Luna's blood turned to ice as she realized they had found a piece of her dress that had torn away during her desperate climb to reach this hiding place. The trail was getting warmer, and she knew that her time was running out like sand through an hourglass. She closed her eyes and tried to think of some way out of this nightmare, some miracle that might yet save her from the fate that seemed as inevitable as the rising of the sun. But the mountains were vast and empty, and she was alone in a way that few people ever experience, alone with nothing but her fear and her determination to die with whatever dignity she could muster. That was when she heard it, a sound so soft and unexpected that at first she thought it might be nothing more than the wind through the trees. But as she listened more carefully, she realized it was something else entirely, the barely audible whisper of moccasined feet moving across stone with the fluid grace of a hunting cat. Someone else was moving through the darkness, someone who understood these mountains in a way that the white men below never could. Luna's heart leaped with a mixture of hope and terror as she realized that she was no longer alone on this rocky outcropping, that someone or something had joined her in her desperate flight from the demons that pursued her through the night. Footsteps stopped just behind her, and Luna felt the presence of another human being as surely as if they had reached out and touched her shoulder. She turned slowly, her hand moving instinctively toward the derringer hidden in her dress, and found herself looking into the darkest eyes she had ever seen. The man crouched beside her was clearly Native American, his long black hair braided with what looked like feathers and small bones, his face painted with intricate designs that seemed to shift and dance in the moonlight. He wore buckskin leggings and a vest made from what appeared to be wolf fur, and across his broad chest hung a necklace of bear claws that spoke of hunts and battles that Luna could barely imagine. But it was his eyes that held her captive, eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul with a mixture of intelligence and compassion that took her breath away. "You are the woman they hunt," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. His English was accented but clear, each word chosen with the precision of a man who understood the power of language and used it sparingly. "I am Toby Riddle of the Modoc people. I have been watching you for 2 days, watching them chase you through my mountains like wolves after a wounded deer. They are close now, closer than you know, and they will not stop until they have what they came for." His words were like a knife through her heart, confirming her worst fears and eliminating any hope she might have harbored of escape. But there was something else in his tone, something that suggested he had not come merely to deliver a death sentence. "Then you know I'm going to die tonight," Luna whispered, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "If you're here to claim some kind of bounty, you're too late. They'll kill me before they let anyone else take me." She pulled the derringer from her dress and held it up so he could see it clearly in the moonlight. "And if they try to take me alive, I'll save them the trouble." The words came out with a determination that surprised even her, and she realized that somewhere during her flight through the wilderness, she had found a strength she never knew she possessed. Death held no terror for her now, only the thought of dying slowly and in agony at the hands of the men who had destroyed her family and her world. Toby Riddle studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes taking in every detail of her appearance and her bearing.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
"You have courage," he said finally, and there was something like respect in his voice. "But courage without wisdom is just another word for foolishness. You think death is your only choice, but you are wrong. There is another way if you are brave enough to take it." He gestured toward the sounds of the approaching gang members, who were now less than 50 feet away from their hiding place. "They want you, yes, but they also want the land your father died for. They want the silver mine he found in the sacred places of my people. They want many things, and they will kill anyone who stands in their way. But there is something they want even more than your body or your father's silver." "What?" Luna asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. There was something in Toby's eyes that suggested he was about to propose something that would change everything, something that would require her to make a choice that would define the rest of her life, however long or short that might be. The sounds of the gang members were getting closer, and she could hear them talking among themselves as they searched the rocks and crevices where she might be hiding. Time was running out, and she knew that whatever Toby Riddle had in mind, it was her only chance of seeing another sunrise. "They want to believe they have won," Toby said, his voice taking on an edge of steel that spoke of battles fought and enemies defeated. "They want to believe that they have broken the spirit of this land and everyone who lives upon it. But if you come with me, if you trust me to protect you in ways that no white man ever could, then we can take that victory away from them. We can make them pay for what they have done to you and your family, and we can do it in a way that will make them wish they had never heard the name Ashford." His words were like a promise and a threat wrapped up in one, and Luna felt something stir in her chest that she had thought was dead and buried with her family. "I don't understand," she whispered, though part of her was beginning to suspect what he was proposing. "What are you asking me to do?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a funeral pyre, and Luna felt as though she was standing at the edge of a precipice with no way back and no clear view of what lay ahead. But in Toby's eyes, she saw something that she had not seen in any white man's face since the night her world had ended. Hope. Not just hope for survival, but hope for something more. Something that might actually be worth surviving for. "I am asking you to trade your life as a white woman for the protection of the Modoc people," Toby said, his words carrying the weight of a formal proposal. "I am asking you to become my woman, to live among my people and learn our ways, to let us shield you from the men who would destroy you. In return, you will help us understand the minds of the white men who seek to take our land, and you will stand with us in the battles that are coming. It is not an easy choice, and it is not a choice you can unmake once it is done. But it is a choice that will let you live, and more than that, it will let you live with purpose." The words washed over Luna like a tide, carrying with them implications that she could barely begin to comprehend. He was offering her sanctuary, but at a price that would cut her off from everything she had ever known about herself and her place in the world. The sound of voices was getting closer now, and Luna could make out individual words as the gang members called to each other. In the darkness, "She's up here somewhere." Jake Garrett's voice cut through the night like a blade. "I can smell her fear. Little birds got nowhere left to fly." The cruelty in his tone made Luna's skin crawl, and she knew that her time for decision was measured in heartbeats rather than minutes. She looked into Toby's eyes and saw not just strength and determination, but something else that surprised her, genuine care for her welfare. As though her fate actually mattered to him beyond whatever strategic advantage her knowledge might provide. "If I agree to this," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her own heartbeat, "what happens to me? What happens to who I am?" The question came from some deep place in her soul, from the part of her that had been raised to believe that a woman's identity was tied to her family, her community, her place in the social order of the white world. To give all of that up would be to die in every way that mattered. To become someone completely different from the woman she had been just moments before. But as she looked at Toby's face in the moonlight, she began to wonder if that might not be exactly what she needed. You become who you choose to become, Toby replied, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had faced similar choices and lived to tell about them. My people believe that identity is not something you are given by others, but something you create through your actions and your choices. You can be Luna Ashford, daughter of a dead rancher and victim of cruel men, or you can be someone new. Someone stronger, someone who writes her own story with her own hands. The choice is yours, but you must choose now, before they find us and take all choice away forever. His words were like a key turning in a lock, opening up possibilities that Luna had never imagined existed. But even as hope began to bloom in her chest, she knew that what he was proposing would require her to abandon everything she had ever been and step into a world that was as alien to her as the surface of the moon. Found her trail. Came a shout from below, and Luna realized with a start that the gang members were now less than 20 feet away from their hiding place. She could hear the scrape of boots on stone, the jingle of spurs, the harsh breathing of men who were closing in on their prey. In seconds, they would be discovered, and then all choices would be taken away from her forever. She looked at Toby, seeing in his eyes the same awareness of their desperate situation, but also seeing something else. Absolute confidence in his ability to protect her, if she would only trust him enough to let him try. I choose you, she whispered, the words coming out in a rush before she could lose her nerve. I choose to live, whatever that means. I choose to trust you. The words felt strange on her tongue, like a foreign language that she was only beginning to learn, but they also felt right in a way that nothing had felt right since the night her world had ended. As soon as the words left her lips, she felt something shift inside her, as though she had indeed died and been reborn as someone completely new in the space of a single heartbeat. Toby's eyes flashed with something that might have been approval, and he reached out to touch her hand with fingers that were surprisingly gentle despite the calluses and scars that spoke of a life lived in constant battle with the elements and with enemies both human and otherwise. Then we go now, he said, his voice taking on the tone of a man who had just accepted a sacred responsibility. Stay close to me, make no sound, and trust that I know these mountains better than any white man ever could. We will disappear into the darkness like smoke, and when the sun rises tomorrow, you will be under the protection of the Modoc people. But remember, Luna Ashford, from this moment forward, you are no longer just a white woman running from white men. You are someone who has chosen to cross the line between two worlds, and there is no going back. His words were both a promise and a warning, and Luna felt the weight of her decision settling over her like a heavy blanket. But beneath the weight, she felt something else, relief, and the first stirring of what might eventually become hope for a future that extended beyond the next few minutes. The gang members were close enough now that Luna could hear individual voices, could make out the words they were saying to each other as they searched the rocks and crevices where she might be hiding. But as Toby began to move with the fluid grace of a man who had been born to these mountains, she found herself following him with a trust that surprised her with its completeness. He seemed to know exactly where to step to avoid loose stones, exactly how to move through the shadows without disturbing so much as a single leaf. It was as though he had become one with the darkness itself, and as Luna followed in his footsteps, she felt as though she too was beginning to disappear into the night, leaving behind the woman she had been and stepping into a future that was as uncertain as it was necessary. Behind them, she could hear Jake Garrett's voice rising in frustration as he realized that his prey had somehow managed to slip away once again. She was here, damn it. Trails fresh as morning dew. Search every rock, every tree, every blade of grass. She can't have just vanished into thin air. But even as he spoke, Luna was following Toby Riddle down a hidden path that seemed to exist only in the spaces between shadows, moving deeper into the heart of the wilderness that had become her refuge and her salvation. The hunt was far from over, but for the first time in 3 weeks, Luna felt as though she might actually have a chance of surviving to see another dawn. And more than that, she felt as though she might actually have found something worth surviving. For the hidden path wound deeper into the heart of the mountains, following ancient game trails that had been carved into the stone by countless generations of deer, elk, and the people who had hunted them since time immemorial. Luna's breath came in short, sharp gasps as she struggled to keep pace with Toby Riddle, her city-bred lungs burning with the effort of climbing through the thin mountain air while her torn dress caught on every branch and thorn that dared to block their way. The leather soles of her once fashionable boots, designed for drawing rooms and garden parties, rather than desperate flights through wilderness, had worn paper thin during her weeks of running, and she could feel every sharp stone and root through what remained of them. Behind them, the shouts of the Garrett gang grew fainter with each passing minute, but Luna knew better than to feel relief just yet. These men were hunters, predators who had spent years tracking down their prey through some of the most unforgiving country in the American West, and they would not give up their pursuit simply because their quarry had momentarily slipped from view. Jake Garrett had not built his reputation on accepting defeat gracefully, and Luna understood with crystalline clarity that this was merely the first move in what would undoubtedly be a much longer and more deadly game of cat and mouse. The mountains might provide temporary sanctuary, but they would not provide permanent salvation. How much farther? She whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of wind through the pines and the distant cry of a hunting owl. Toby turned to look at her, and even in the pale moonlight, she could see the concern in his dark eyes as he took in her exhausted state, and the blood that had begun to seep through the worn leather of her boots. He had been moving with the easy, ground-eating stride of a man who had been born to these mountains, but now he slowed his pace and gestured toward a cluster of large boulders that formed a natural shelter beneath the spreading branches of an ancient oak tree. "We rest here," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was accustomed to making life-and-death decisions in the wilderness. "Your feet are bleeding, and you will not make it much farther without proper care. Besides, we have reached the boundary of my people's traditional hunting grounds, and it would be unwise to proceed without proper preparation." There was something in his tone that suggested layers of meaning beneath the simple words, and Luna found herself wondering what exactly constituted proper preparation in the world she had just chosen to enter. As they settled into the shelter of the rocks, Toby produced a leather pouch from his belt and began to remove items that seemed almost magical in their variety and usefulness. There were strips of soft buckskin that he tore into bandages, a small clay pot filled with what appeared to be some kind of healing salve, and dried strips of meat that he offered to Luna with a gesture that somehow managed to be both practical and ceremonial. "Venison," he explained simply. "Killed 3 days ago during the new moon, prepared according to the old ways. It will give you strength for what is to come." Luna accepted the food gratefully, surprised by how hungry she had become during their flight through the mountains. The meat was tough and heavily seasoned with unfamiliar spices, but it was the first real nourishment she had tasted in days, and she found herself eating with an enthusiasm that would have horrified her mother's sense of proper ladylike behavior. As she chewed, she became aware that Toby was watching her with an expression of quiet assessment, as though he was trying to determine whether she truly had the strength and determination necessary to survive the transformation she had chosen. "Tell me about your people," Luna said between bites, partly from genuine curiosity and partly from a desire to break the silence that had settled over them like a heavy blanket. "What will they think of me? What will they expect?" The questions tumbled out of her in a rush, and she realized that despite her desperate situation, She had not truly considered the practical implications of what she had agreed to. She was about to enter a world that was as foreign to her as the surface of the moon, and she had no idea what customs, beliefs, or expectations would govern her new existence. Toby was silent for a long moment, his fingers working with practiced efficiency as he prepared the bandages for her wounded feet. When he finally spoke, his words were carefully chosen and weighted with the gravity of someone who understood the full magnitude of what she was facing. My people have lived in these mountains for more generations than the white man can count. He began, his voice taking on the rhythm of a storyteller sharing sacred knowledge. We have seen empires rise and fall, seasons change, and the great wheel of life turn through countless cycles of birth and death and rebirth. But in all that time, we have never seen anything quite like what is happening now. He paused to examine her feet, and Luna winced as he gently removed her ruined boots, to reveal the full extent of the damage that had been done by her desperate flight through the wilderness. The soles of her feet were a mass of blisters and cuts, stained with dried blood and dirt, and she could see the shock in Toby's eyes as he realized just how much pain she had been enduring without complaint. "You have the spirit of a warrior," he said softly, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. Most white women would have given up long before now, would have begged for mercy or death rather than continue fighting. But you have something different inside you, something that my people will recognize and respect. As he began to clean and dress her wounds with surprising gentleness, Toby continued his explanation of what awaited her in the Modoc village. "The old ways are dying," he said, his voice heavy with sadness and resignation. "The white man's government has made treaties that they break as easily as they breathe, and our young warriors grow angry and restless as they watch their hunting grounds disappear beneath the plow and the mining pan. There are those among my people who believe that the only path forward is war, total war that will either drive the white man from our lands or see us all die in the attempt." Luna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air as she absorbed the implications of his words. She had chosen to align herself with a people who were facing the very real possibility of annihilation, and she began to understand that her decision to trust Toby Riddle had consequences that extended far beyond her own personal survival. "And what do you believe?" she asked quietly, though she wasn't entirely certain she wanted to hear the answer. "I believe that wisdom lies in understanding one's enemy," Toby replied, his hands never pausing in their careful ministration of her wounds. "The white man is not a single creature with a single mind. Some are cruel and greedy, like the men who hunt you. Others are simply ignorant, following leaders who care nothing for the lives they destroy in pursuit of power and wealth. But there are also those who might be reached, who might be made to understand that there is room in this land for both our peoples, if we can find a way to share it without destroying each other." The idea was revolutionary, almost heretical in its implications, and Luna found herself studying Toby's face with new eyes as she began to understand the true nature of the man who had chosen to save her. He was not simply a warrior or a hunter, but a visionary who saw possibilities where others saw only conflict and destruction. It was a dangerous position to hold in a world that seemed increasingly polarized between those who would fight to the death and those who would surrender everything for the sake of peace. "Is that why you helped me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you think I might be able to help you reach some kind of understanding with the white world?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge that might either connect them or collapse under the weight of mismatched expectations. Luna realized that she needed to understand Toby's motivations if she was going to have any hope of surviving in the world she was about to enter. Toby finished wrapping her feet and sat back on his heels, his dark eyes reflecting the pale light of the moon as he considered his answer. "Partly," he admitted, and Luna appreciated his honesty even as it sent a cold spike of fear through her heart. Your knowledge of white customs and thinking could be valuable to my people as we try to navigate the treacherous waters of negotiation and diplomacy. But that is not the only reason I chose to help you." He reached out and touched her cheek with fingers that were surprisingly gentle, and Luna felt something electric pass between them that had nothing to do with strategic alliances or political considerations. "I helped you because when I watched you during your flight through the mountains, I saw something that I had not seen in any white person before. I saw someone who understood what it meant to lose everything, to have your world torn away by forces beyond your control. I saw someone who knew what it was like to be hunted, to be alone, to face death with dignity rather than surrender to those who would destroy you." His words touched something deep within Luna's chest, a place that had been frozen since the night her family died, and she felt tears beginning to form in her eyes despite her efforts to maintain the stoic composure she had cultivated during her weeks of flight. "You saw someone like yourself," she whispered, understanding flooding through her like water through a broken dam. "Yes," Toby said simply. "I saw someone who might understand the choices I have had to make, the path I have chosen to walk between two worlds that seem determined to destroy each other. It is a lonely path, and I have been walking it alone for too long." The vulnerability in his voice was stunning, and Luna realized that this proud warrior was offering her something far more precious than mere physical protection. He was offering her partnership, understanding, and the possibility of a love that transcended the boundaries of race and culture. The sound of distant hoofbeats drifted through the night air, still far away but closer than Luna would have liked, and both she and Toby froze as they listened to determine the direction and distance of their pursuers. "They are persistent," Toby observed with grudging respect. "But they are also making enough noise to wake the dead, which means they are frustrated and probably splitting up to cover more ground. That works to our advantage." He helped Luna to her feet, and she was surprised to discover that the makeshift bandages and whatever healing salve he had used had already begun to ease the pain in her wounded feet. "What was in that medicine?" she asked as they prepared to resume their journey deeper into the mountains. "Willow bark for the pain, honey to prevent infection, and ground obsidian to help the cuts heal cleanly," Toby replied matter-of-factly. "My grandmother was a medicine woman, and she taught me the healing arts before she passed into the spirit world. It is knowledge that has served me well during the long years of war and conflict that have marked my life." There was a wealth of history in those simple words, stories of battles fought and wounds healed, of a young man forced to grow up quickly in a world that showed no mercy to the weak or unprepared. As they continued their climb through the increasingly rugged terrain, Toby began to share more details about the village they were approaching and the people who would soon become Luna's new family, whether she was ready for such a transformation or not. "The village is led by my uncle, Chief Shanshan, who is both a war leader and a peace chief depending on the needs of the moment," he explained as they navigated a particularly treacherous stretch of loose scree that threatened to send them tumbling into the canyon below. "He is a wise man, but he is also practical, and he will want to know exactly what benefit you can provide to our people before he agrees to offer you permanent sanctuary." The idea of being evaluated like a piece of livestock up for auction was hardly appealing, but Luna understood that she was no longer in a position to make demands or expect special treatment simply because of her gender or her past social status. She was entering a world where survival depended on useful skills and practical contributions, not on the accident of birth or the ability to make polite conversation at dinner parties. "What can I offer them?" she asked, genuinely curious about what skills she possessed that might be valuable to a people fighting for their very existence. "More than you might think," Toby replied with a slight smile that Luna found unexpectedly reassuring. "You can read and write in English, which means you can help us understand the legal documents and treaties that the white government uses to justify their seizure of our lands. You understand white customs and thinking, which could be invaluable in negotiations." And you have shown that you possess the kind of courage and determination that my people respect above all other virtues. They had reached a high plateau that offered a sweeping view of the valley below, and Luna could see the pinpricks of light from the Garrett gang's torches as they continued their search through the darkness. The lights seemed to be moving in a systematic pattern, suggesting that Jake Garrett had indeed split his forces and was conducting a methodical sweep of the area. It was only a matter of time before they found the beginning of the trail that Luna and Toby had followed into the mountains. "They will find our path by dawn," Toby observed, echoing Luna's own thoughts. "But by then, we will be in the heart of Modoc territory, and the advantage will be ours. My people know every rock, every tree, every game trail in these mountains, and we have been fighting enemies here for longer than living memory can recall. Jake Garrett may be a skilled hunter, but he is about to discover what it means to be the hunted rather than the hunter." There was something almost predatory in Toby's smile as he spoke, and Luna felt a shiver of anticipation mixed with fear, as she realized that she was now allied with forces that could be every bit as dangerous as the men who pursued her. The Modoc were not gentle farmers or peaceful traders. They were warriors who had been forged in the crucible of constant conflict, and they would not hesitate to kill anyone who threatened their survival or their sacred lands. "Will they accept me?" Luna asked as they resumed their journey, her voice betraying the anxiety that had been building within her as the reality of her situation became increasingly clear. "I mean, truly accept me, not just tolerate me as some kind of useful tool?" The question went to the heart of her deepest fears about the choice she had made. She had traded one kind of exile for another, and she needed to know whether she would find genuine belonging among the Modoc or merely a different kind of isolation. Toby was quiet for a long moment as they picked their way through a grove of towering pines whose branches blocked out most of the moonlight, leaving them to navigate by instinct and the dim glow of starlight filtering through the canopy overhead. When he finally answered, his words carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom and painful experience. "Acceptance is not something that is given freely among my people," he said carefully. "It must be earned through deeds, through sacrifice, through the willingness to put the needs of the community above your own desires. You will be tested, Luna Ashford, in ways that you cannot yet imagine. Some of those tests will be physical, others will challenge your spirit and your resolve. But if you prove yourself worthy, if you show that you truly understand what it means to be Modoc, then you will find a family that will stand with you against any enemy, even unto death." The path began to level out as they approached what appeared to be a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside by centuries of wind and water erosion. In the center of this space, Luna could make out the dim glow of carefully banked fires and the shadowy outlines of structures that seemed to blend seamlessly into the surrounding landscape. The village was smaller than she had expected, perhaps 30 or 40 dwellings arranged in a rough circle around a central fire pit. But there was something about the way it nestled into the mountain that spoke of permanence and deep roots. "Welcome to the heart of the Modoc Nation," Toby said quietly, his voice filled with pride and reverence for the place that had shaped him and countless generations before him. "This village has stood in this place for more than 200 years, hidden from the eyes of enemies and protected by the spirits of the mountains themselves. Here, the old ways are still strong, and the ancient wisdom of our people lives on. Despite all the efforts of the white government to destroy it, as they approached the village perimeter, Luna became aware that they were being watched by sentries, who remained invisible in the darkness, but whose presence could be felt like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. She had no doubt that these hidden guardians could have killed both her and Toby without warning if they had been perceived as threats, and the knowledge sent a chill of both fear and respect through her tired body. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead of them, materializing so suddenly and silently that Luna gasped in surprise and instinctively reached for the derringer that was still hidden in the folds of her dress. But Toby placed a gentle but firm hand on her arm, preventing her from drawing the weapon as he stepped forward to greet the newcomer with what appeared to be a complex series of hand gestures and softly spoken words in a language that sounded like music mixed with the whisper of wind through stone. The sentry, a young man whose face was painted with intricate designs that seemed to shift and flow in the flickering light of distant fires, listened to Toby's explanation with grave attention before turning his dark eyes toward Luna, with an intensity that made her feel as though he was looking directly into her soul. After what seemed like an eternity, he nodded once and stepped aside, gesturing for them to proceed toward the village center where other figures were beginning to emerge from their dwellings to investigate the arrival of unexpected visitors. In the depths of the night, "What did you tell him?" Luna whispered as they walked through the village, past structures that seemed to be built from a combination of natural materials and traditional techniques that had been passed down through countless generations. The buildings appeared to be partially underground, with walls of fitted stone and roofs covered in earth and growing plants that would make them nearly invisible from any distance. "I told him that you were under my protection, and that you had chosen to trade your old life for a new one among our people," Toby replied quietly. "I also told him that the men who hunt you will arrive by dawn, and that the village must be prepared to defend itself if necessary. He will carry that message to my uncle, and by sunrise, every warrior in the village will be ready for war." They had reached the central fire pit, where the embers of the evening's council fire still glowed with a warm, welcoming light that seemed to drive away some of the chill that had settled into Luna's bones during their long journey through the mountains. Around the fire, several figures sat in silent contemplation, their faces marked by the kind of deep lines that spoke of years spent facing difficult decisions and bearing heavy responsibilities. These were clearly the elders of the village, the men and women whose wisdom guided the Modoc people through the treacherous currents of a rapidly changing world. One of the figures rose from his place by the fire and stepped forward into the circle of light, and Luna found herself looking at a man whose very presence seemed to command respect and attention. He was perhaps 50 years old, with silver beginning to thread through his long black hair and the kind of weathered features that spoke of a lifetime spent outdoors facing the challenges of mountain weather and human conflict. But it was his eyes that held Luna's attention, eyes that seemed to hold the accumulated wisdom of generations and the quiet strength of someone who had never backed down from a fight worth fighting. "Uncle," Toby said respectfully, and Luna realized that she was in the presence of Chief Shanshan himself, the man who would ultimately decide whether she lived or died, whether she found sanctuary among the Modoc or was turned away to face the mercies of Jake Garrett and his gang. The weight of that realization settled over her like a blanket of lead, and she found herself struggling to remember how to breathe as the chief's penetrating gaze settled on her with the intensity of a hunter sizing up potential prey. Chief Shanshan studied Luna with the intensity of a man who had spent decades reading the souls of both allies and enemies, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts as the silence stretched between them like a taut bowstring. The other elders remained motionless around the fire, their expressions equally unreadable, and Luna began to understand that she was facing not just one man's judgment, but the collective wisdom of an entire people who had learned through bitter experience that the wrong decision could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The weight of their scrutiny pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force, and she found herself fighting the urge to fidget or look away from the chief's penetrating gaze. "So," Shanshan said finally, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, "my nephew brings me a white woman who claims to seek sanctuary among our people. In all my years as chief, I have seen many desperate souls flee to our mountains seeking refuge from their enemies, but never before has one arrived wearing the face of those who would destroy us." His words were not accusatory, merely stating facts, but Luna felt the sting of them nonetheless. She was indeed asking these people to protect her from other white men, to risk their own safety for the sake of someone who belonged to the race that had brought nothing but death and destruction to their homeland. She is not like the others. Uncle, Toby interjected, stepping slightly forward as though to shield Luna from the full force of his chief's judgment. I have watched her for days, seen how she conducts herself when she believes no one is looking. She has courage, honor, and the strength to endure suffering without complaint. More importantly, she has knowledge that could help our people navigate the treacherous waters of white politics and law. His voice carried the passionate conviction of a man defending something precious, and Luna felt a warmth spread through her chest at the realization that Toby was willing to risk his own standing within the tribe to protect her. Chief Shanshan's eyes shifted to his nephew, and Luna caught a glimpse of something that might have been amusement flickering in their depths before his expression returned to its previous mask of stern neutrality. "And what of the men who hunt her?" he asked, his tone suggesting that he already knew the answer. "Are we to risk the lives of our warriors defending someone who has brought war to our very doorstep?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, and Luna realized that the chief was not simply evaluating her worthiness to join the tribe, but weighing the potential consequences of harboring her against the benefits she might provide. Before Toby could answer, Luna stepped forward, her chin raised with a dignity that surprised even her after everything she had endured. "Chief Shanshan," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that clawed at her insides, "I would not ask your people to risk their lives for mine if I did not believe I could offer something valuable in return. The men who hunt me are the same men who have been stealing land from native peoples all across the territory, using forged documents and corrupted officials to legitimize their theft. I have seen their methods, studied their techniques, and I know how they operate." She paused, gathering her courage for what she was about to reveal. "My father discovered a silver mine on land that has been sacred to your people since before the white man ever set foot in these mountains. Jake Garrett killed my family to get the deed to that land. But what he doesn't know is that the mine is built on a network of caves that your ancestors used for ceremonies and burials. If he tries to expand his operations, he will desecrate sites that are sacred to the Modoc people." The reaction was immediate and electric. Several of the elders rose to their feet, their faces dark with anger, while others began speaking rapidly in their native language, their voices rising with each exchange. Luna had clearly touched upon something of profound importance to these people, and she began to understand that her knowledge of the mine's location and Garrett's plans might indeed be valuable enough to justify the risks involved in protecting her. Chief Shanshan raised his hand, and the voices fell silent as quickly as they had risen. But Luna could see the fury burning in his eyes like banked coals, waiting for the right moment to burst into flame. "You speak of the Kumish caves," Shanshan said, his voice heavy with the weight of generations of reverence and loss. "The place where the first spirits taught our people the ceremonies that bind us to this land, where the bones of our greatest chiefs lie in eternal rest. If what you say is true, if this Garrett seeks to defile the sacred places—" He did not finish the sentence, but the implications hung in the air like a storm about to break. Luna had just revealed that the conflict over her fate was part of a much larger and more significant struggle, one that touched upon the very spiritual heart of Modoc identity. An elderly woman who had been sitting silently in the shadows spoke. For the first time, her voice carrying the crackling authority of someone who had lived through more winters than anyone else present. "Winema speaks truth," she said, using a name that Luna did not recognize, but which seemed to carry special significance among the gathered elders. "The dreams have shown me a white woman who would come to us in the time of greatest darkness, bringing knowledge that would help our people protect the sacred places from those who would destroy them. The spirits have prepared the way for this meeting." Chief Shanshan nodded respectfully to the old woman, whom Luna realized must be the village's primary medicine woman or spiritual leader. Her words carried obvious weight among the council, and Luna felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps her arrival had been interpreted as something more than mere coincidence. But even as that hope began to bloom in her chest, she could see the practical considerations warring with spiritual beliefs in the chief's expression. Grandmother Takla has spoken wisdom, Shanshin acknowledged, but wisdom must be balanced with practical necessities. If we shelter this woman, we declare ourselves enemies of men who have already proven their willingness to kill for what they want. Our warriors are brave and skilled, but we are few, and our children need protection. Above all else, he turned his attention back to Luna, and she could see the internal struggle playing out behind his eyes. You ask us to risk everything on the promise that your knowledge will be valuable enough to justify the danger you bring. But knowledge without proof is merely words, and words will not stop bullets. Luna felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge, knowing that her next words would determine not just her own fate, but potentially the future of the sacred caves and the people who had protected them for countless generations. I can give you more than words, she said, reaching into the hidden pocket of her dress to withdraw a folded piece of paper that she had carried with her throughout her desperate flight. This is a map my father drew showing the exact location of the mine and the cave system beneath it. But more than that, it shows the weak points in Garrett's operation, the places where a small force of determined fighters could disrupt his plans and make it impossible for him to continue his work. She handed the map to Chief Shanshin, who unfolded it carefully and studied its contents by the light of the fire. Luna watched his expression change as he traced the careful lines her father had drawn, noting the entrance points to the caves, the location of the mining equipment, and the routes Garrett's men used to transport silver ore down the mountain. It was a military intelligence treasure trove, the kind of detailed information that could turn a desperate defensive action into a precisely executed strategic strike. Your father was a careful man, Shanshin observed, and Luna could hear grudging respect in his voice. These details could indeed be valuable if used correctly. But tell me, why should we trust that you have not led your enemies directly to our village? How do we know that this is not an elaborate trap designed to reveal our location to those who would destroy us? The question was reasonable, even expected. But it still sent a chill through Luna's heart, as she realized that despite everything, the chief still saw her primarily as a potential threat rather than an ally. Before Luna could formulate an answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed through the mountain air, and every person around the fire tensed as they listened to determine the distance and direction of the riders. Toby moved to Luna's side, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt, while the other warriors began to fade into the shadows with the practiced efficiency of men who had spent their lives fighting enemies in this exact terrain. Chief Shanshin's expression hardened as he realized that the theoretical discussion of Luna's value had just become a very practical and immediate concern. It seems we are about to discover whether your presence here is a blessing or a curse, Shanshin said grimly, folding the map and tucking it into his clothing. If Garrett's men have tracked you to our village, then many good people may die tonight because of your choices. I hope for all our sakes that your knowledge proves to be worth the price we may have to pay for it. His words were like a cold hand closing around Luna's heart, and she felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as she realized that her desperate flight from the Garrett gang had potentially brought disaster to the very people she was asking to protect her. Toby placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but Luna could see the tension in his posture as he prepared for what might be his people's final battle. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you are under my protection now. I will not let them take you without a fight. His words were both a promise and a warning, and Luna understood that she had crossed a line from which there could be no return. She was no longer simply a white woman seeking sanctuary. She was someone whose fate was now inextricably linked with that of the Modoc people. The hoofbeats grew closer, and Luna could make out individual voices as the riders approached the village perimeter. Jake Garrett's harsh laughter cut through the night air like a blade, and she felt her blood turn to ice as she recognized the sound that had haunted her nightmares for weeks. "I know you're up there somewhere, little bird," Garrett's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "No use hiding now. We found your trail, and we've got enough men to burn out every rat's nest in these mountains if we have to." Chief Shanshan gestured sharply, and the remaining elders melted away into the darkness with a silence that spoke of generations of practice in concealment and guerrilla warfare. Within moments, Luna found herself alone by the fire with Toby and the chief, though she knew that dozens of warriors were positioned in the shadows around them, ready to fight and die for their people if necessary. The village that had seemed so welcoming moments before had transformed into a fortress, and Luna began to understand the true extent of the military capabilities that the Modoc people possessed. "How many men does Garrett have with him?" Shanshan asked tersely, his attention focused on the tactical situation rather than the philosophical questions that had dominated their earlier conversation. Luna forced herself to concentrate, pushing aside her fear to focus on the practical details that might mean the difference between life and death for everyone in the village. 6, maybe 8, she replied, closing her eyes to visualize the gang members she had seen during her weeks of flight. Jake and Marcus Garrett, Snake Morrison, and at least 3 others I don't know by name. They're all experienced fighters, but they don't know these mountains the way your people do. They're tracking by torchlight, which means they can't see more than a few feet in any direction, and they're making enough noise to wake the dead. Toby nodded grimly. Arrogant and overconfident. They think superior firepower will be enough to overwhelm us, but they have no idea what they're walking into. He turned to his uncle. "Give me 20 warriors, and I can end this before dawn. These men will never threaten our people again." But Chief Shanshan shook his head, his expression thoughtful as he weighed the options available to them. "No, nephew. If we kill them here, others will come looking for them, and eventually someone will discover our village. Better to teach them a lesson they will not forget, to make them understand that pursuing this woman will cost them more than they are willing to pay." He turned to Luna, and she could see a plan forming behind his calculating eyes. "You say these men want you alive. Very well. We will give them what they think they want, but on our terms rather than theirs." Luna felt her heart sink as she began to understand what the chief was proposing. "You want to use me as bait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The idea of placing herself in Garrett's hands, even temporarily, filled her with a terror that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. But even as fear clawed at her insides, she could see the tactical wisdom in Shanshan's plan. If they could lure the gang into a carefully prepared ambush, they could neutralize the threat without revealing the village's location or capabilities. "Not bait," Toby said fiercely, his eyes flashing with protective anger. "Partnership. You know these men better than anyone, know how they think and what they expect. If we work together, we can turn their confidence against them and end this threat once and for all." His words carried the weight of absolute conviction, and Luna felt some of her fear recede as she realized that she would not be facing this ordeal alone. Chief Shanshan studied both of them for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Very well. But understand this, both of you. If this plan fails, if our village is discovered, or our people are harmed, I will hold you both responsible. The survival of the Modoc people takes precedence over everything else, including their personal feelings for each other." His warning was clear and uncompromising, and Luna felt the weight of an entire civilization resting on her shoulders as she contemplated what she was about to undertake. The plan that emerged from their hurried consultation was both elegant and terrifying in its simplicity. Luna would allow herself to be captured by Garrett's men at a predetermined location, leading them away from the village and into a narrow canyon where Modoc warriors would be waiting in concealment. The gang would believe they had finally achieved their objective, but in reality, They would be walking into a carefully orchestrated trap that would neutralize them, without revealing the true extent of Modoc capabilities or the location of their hidden stronghold. As they prepared to put the plan into motion, Toby pulled Luna aside, his face grave with concern and something deeper that she was only beginning to recognize. "Are you certain you want to do this?" he asked quietly. "Once you put yourself in Garrett's hands, even for a few minutes, there will be no guarantee that we can protect you. These men are capable of unspeakable cruelty, and if something goes wrong—" He did not finish the sentence, but Luna could see the anguish in his eyes as he contemplated the possibility of losing her. Just when he had found her, Luna reached out and touched his face, surprised by her own boldness, but needing to offer him some measure of comfort and reassurance. "I've been running from these men for weeks," she said softly. "I'm tired of being afraid, tired of letting them control my fate through fear alone. It's time to take back some measure of control, to show them that I'm not the helpless victim they believe me to be." Her words carried a strength that surprised even her, and she realized that somewhere during her ordeal, she had discovered reserves of courage and determination that she had never known she possessed. The sound of approaching voices grew louder, and Luna could make out individual words as Garrett's men coordinated their search of the surrounding area. "Fan out," Jake Garrett's voice commanded. "Check every cave, every overhang, every place a frightened woman might think to hide. She's here somewhere, and we're not leaving these mountains without her." Toby gripped Luna's hands tightly, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that took her breath away. "Remember," he whispered urgently, "no matter what happens, no matter what they say or do, you are not alone. My people are watching, and I will be there when you need me most. Trust in that, trust in us, and we will see this through together." Luna nodded, drawing strength from his conviction, even as terror threatened to overwhelm her rational mind. She was about to place herself in the hands of the men who had murdered her family, to gamble everything on the hope that the Modoc warriors would be able to rescue her before Garrett's cruelty could destroy her completely. It was a desperate plan born of desperate circumstances, but it was also the first time since her world had ended that she felt like she was actively fighting back rather than simply running away, as she prepared to step out of the circle of firelight and into the darkness where her enemies waited. Luna felt a strange sense of clarity settle over her like a mantle of calm determination. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine not just her own fate, but the future of the sacred caves and the people who had welcomed her into their hidden world. She had asked for sanctuary and been given the chance to earn it through courage and sacrifice. Now it was time to discover whether she possessed the strength to see it through. The fire crackled softly behind her as she walked away from the safety of the village and toward the uncertain darkness where Jake Garrett and his men waited with their guns and their cruelty and their absolute confidence that they had finally cornered their prey. But for the first time since that terrible night when her world had ended, Luna Ashford was not facing her enemies alone. The narrow canyon known to the Modoc as Waka's Valley stretched before Luna like the throat of some ancient beast, its towering walls of black volcanic rock rising 300 feet on either side to frame a sliver of star-filled sky that seemed impossibly distant and cold. The path that wound through the canyon floor was treacherous even in daylight, littered with loose stones and hidden crevices that could easily break a horse's leg or send an unwary rider tumbling into the shadows that pooled like dark water between the massive boulders. But it was precisely these hazardous conditions that made Waka's Valley the perfect location for the trap that Chief Shanshan and his warriors had spent the past hour preparing with the methodical precision of men who had been fighting guerrilla warfare since before they could walk. Luna crouched behind a fallen log near the canyon's entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs as she listened to the approaching sounds of Jake Garrett's band picking their way through the darkness with all the subtlety of a cattle stampede. True to form, The outlaws were making no effort to conceal their presence, their torches blazing like beacons in the night and their voices carrying easily through the still mountain air as they called out taunts and threats designed to flush their quarry from whatever hiding place she might have found. They were supremely confident in their superior numbers and firepower, never suspecting that they were walking directly into the kind of carefully orchestrated ambush that had been the specialty of Modoc warriors for countless generations. "Come on out, little bird." Jake Garrett's voice echoed off the canyon walls, distorted by the acoustics into something that sounded more demonic than human. "We know you're in there somewhere, and we've got all night to smoke you out. Might as well make this easy on yourself and save us all a lot of trouble." His laughter was like broken glass grinding against stone, and Luna felt bile rise in her throat as she remembered the sound of that same laughter on the night her family died. The man who had destroyed her world was less than 100 yards away, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath and hear the jingle of his spurs with every step from her concealed position. Luna could see the outlaw gang spread out in a rough line across the canyon mouth, their rifles held ready and their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Marcus Garrett rode slightly behind his older brother, his young face twisted with the kind of eager cruelty that came from a lifetime of taking what he wanted through violence and intimidation. Snake Morrison had dismounted and was examining the ground near the canyon entrance, following the carefully prepared false trail that Toby and 2 other Modoc warriors had laid down less than an hour before. The other gang members fanned out to either side, creating a net that they believed would prevent any escape once they had cornered their prey. What the outlaws could not see, what their torchlight and city-bred eyes were completely incapable of detecting, were the 30 Modoc warriors positioned throughout the canyon in concealment, so perfect that they seemed to have become one with the very stone itself. Luna had watched in amazement as these men had transformed the narrow valley into a killing ground, using their intimate knowledge of every rock and shadow to create firing positions that would allow them to deliver devastating crossfire, while remaining virtually invisible to their enemies. It was a masterpiece of tactical preparation, and Luna felt a surge of fierce pride as she realized that she was about to witness the kind of military genius that had allowed the Modoc people to survive against impossible odds for generations. The Modoc people to survive against impossible odds for generations. Plan was elegantly simple in its conception, but would require split-second timing and absolute courage to execute successfully. Luna would reveal herself to the gang at the far end of the canyon, appearing to be trapped and helpless while actually leading them deeper into the prepared killing zone. Once the outlaws were fully committed to pursuing her through the narrow confines of Wacas Valley, the hidden warriors would emerge from concealment and demand their surrender. If Garrett and his men chose to fight rather than yield, they would discover that they had walked into a nightmare from which there would be no escape. But the success of the entire operation depended on Luna's ability to convince some of the most dangerous men in the territory that she was a frightened, helpless woman, rather than the bait in a carefully orchestrated trap. It would require her to channel every ounce of acting ability she possessed to project vulnerability and desperation, while actually maintaining the presence of mind necessary to lead her enemies exactly where the Modoc warriors needed them to be. One mistake, one moment of overconfidence or poorly timed movement, and the entire plan would collapse into chaos and bloodshed. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Luna rose from her hiding place and began to run deeper into the canyon, making just enough noise to ensure that the outlaws would hear her movement without being so obvious about it that they would suspect deception. Behind her, she heard Jake Garrett's triumphant shout as he spotted her fleeing figure, followed by the thunder of hoofbeats as the entire gang spurred their horses into pursuit. "There she is," Garrett bellowed. "I told you the little bird couldn't fly much farther. After her, boys, but remember what I said. I want her alive and unmarked when we catch her. Luna ran with every ounce of speed she could muster. Her feet, finding purchase on stones that had been carefully marked by the Modoc scouts to ensure safe passage through the treacherous terrain. Behind her, she could hear the outlaws struggling to navigate the same path on horseback, their mounts stumbling and sliding on the loose scree as they tried to maintain their pursuit in the darkness. The sound of men cursing and horses snorting in fear echoed off the canyon walls, creating a cacophony of noise that would mask the movements of the warriors positioning themselves for the coming confrontation. As she reached the halfway point of the canyon, Luna allowed herself to stumble and fall, crying out in apparent pain as she clutched her ankle and struggled to regain her footing. The performance was designed to convince the pursuing outlaws that their quarry was finally becoming exhausted and vulnerable, encouraging them to press their attack rather than proceeding with the caution that might have saved their lives. From the corner of her eye, she could see Jake Garrett spurring his horse to greater speed, his face twisted with anticipation as he closed the distance between himself and the woman who had cost him so much time and effort. "Got you now, little bird," Garrett called out as he drew within 50 yards of Luna's position. "No more running, no more hiding. Time to pay for all the trouble you've caused me." He raised his rifle, not to shoot but to use as a club once he had ridden her down, and Luna felt a moment of pure terror as she realized how close she was to falling back into the hands of the man who had destroyed everything she had ever loved. But even as fear threatened to paralyze her, she forced herself to remember Toby's words and the promise that she was not facing this ordeal alone. The moment had come. Luna pushed herself to her feet and continued her desperate flight toward the far end of the canyon, where the walls narrowed to create a natural bottleneck that would funnel the pursuing outlaws into the perfect position for the ambush. Behind her, she could hear the entire gang whooping and hollering as they sensed victory within their grasp, their discipline breaking down in the face of what appeared to be certain success. They had no idea that every step was taking them deeper into a trap that had been designed specifically to exploit their arrogance and overconfidence. As Luna reached the narrowest point of the canyon, where the walls rose almost vertically on either side, and the path became little more than a game trail winding between massive boulders, she suddenly found her way blocked by a figure that materialized from the shadows like a spirit made manifest. Captain John Shanshan, the chief's younger brother and war leader of the Modoc warriors, stood directly in her path with his rifle raised and pointed at the pursuing outlaws. His face was painted for war with intricate designs that seemed to shift and flow in the flickering torchlight, and his eyes burned with the cold fury of a man who had seen too many of his people die at the hands of white aggressors. "That's far enough," Shanshan called out in perfect English, his voice carrying easily through the canyon despite its conversational tone. "You men are trespassing on sacred Modoc land, and you are pursuing someone who is under our protection. I suggest you turn around and ride away while you still can." The war leader's words were polite, almost courteous, but there was something in his bearing that suggested he would be perfectly happy if the outlaws chose to ignore his warning. The effect on Jake Garrett and his gang was immediate and dramatic. Their triumphant pursuit came to an abrupt halt as they found themselves facing not a helpless woman, but an armed and clearly dangerous Native American warrior who had appeared out of nowhere in what they had believed to be empty wilderness. Several of the outlaws began looking around nervously, suddenly aware that the canyon walls that had seemed like convenient barriers to prevent their quarry's escape might actually be traps that could conceal any number of hidden enemies. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" Jake Garrett demanded, his voice cracking slightly as he struggled to maintain his composure in the face of this unexpected development. "This is a private matter between me and that woman, and it ain't none of your damn business." But even as he spoke, Luna could see the uncertainty creeping into his expression as he began to realize that the situation had shifted dramatically from what he had expected. Captain Shanshan smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. My name is John Shanshan, war leader of the Modoc people, and you are currently surrounded by 30 of my best warriors. The woman you have been pursuing has requested sanctuary among our people, and we have decided to grant it. You have exactly 1 minute to turn around and leave our territory, or we will be forced to take more direct action. As if to emphasize his point, the war leader raised his hand, and the sound of rifle bolts being worked echoed from the canyon walls as invisible. Marksmen prepared for battle. The reaction from Garrett's gang was immediate chaos. Several of the men began backing their horses toward the canyon entrance, their eyes darting frantically as they tried to spot the hidden riflemen who had them in their sights. Snake Morrison drew his pistol but seemed uncertain about what target to aim at, while Marcus Garrett looked to his older brother for guidance that was not forthcoming. Only Jake Garrett himself seemed determined to press forward despite the obvious danger, his face flushed with anger and wounded pride. You think you can threaten me with a bunch of savages hiding in the rocks? Garrett snarled, raising his own rifle and pointing it directly at Captain Shanshan's chest. I've got business with that woman, and no jumped-up Indian is going to stop me from conducting it. Get out of my way, or I'll put a bullet in you and take my chances with your friends. His words carried the desperate bravado of a man who had never backed down from a fight and was not about to start now. Regardless of the odds stacked against him, Luna held her breath as she watched the confrontation unfold, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether the carefully laid trap would succeed or collapse into the kind of violent chaos that could easily claim the lives of people she had come to care about. She could see Toby moving through the shadows above the canyon floor, positioning himself to intervene if the situation deteriorated beyond the point of peaceful resolution. But she also knew that Captain Shanshan was a seasoned warrior who had faced down more dangerous enemies than Jake Garrett, and she trusted that he would not allow himself to be intimidated by empty threats. Very well, Shanshan said calmly, his finger moving to the trigger of his rifle. You have made your choice. The war leader's voice carried the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence, and Luna saw Jake Garrett's eyes widen as he realized that he had pushed the situation beyond the point of bluff and counterbluff. The Modoc warrior was prepared to kill him where he stood, and nothing in Garrett's experience had prepared him for facing an enemy who showed no fear of death or consequences. But before either man could fire, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Brother, wait. Toby Riddle stepped into view from behind one of the massive boulders, his own rifle held ready but pointed toward the ground rather than at the outlaws. These men are not worth spilling blood over. They are cowards and bullies who prey on the weak and defenseless. Let them live with the knowledge that they were defeated by people they consider inferior to themselves. The psychological impact of Toby's words was devastating. By suggesting that the outlaws were beneath contempt rather than worthy enemies, he had struck at the very core of their self-image as dangerous men who commanded respect through fear and violence. Luna could see the effect rippling through the gang as they realized that they were being dismissed as unworthy of serious consideration, and she had to admire the tactical brilliance of using their own pride and arrogance against them. Jake Garrett's face went through a series of rapid color changes as he struggled to process this latest insult to his authority and reputation. You think you're better than me? He demanded, his voice rising to a near shriek. You think because you paint your face and hide in the rocks that makes you some kind of warrior? I've killed better men than you before breakfast, and I'll... His rant was cut short as Captain Shanshan fired a single shot that passed so close to Garrett's head that it singed the hair above his left ear. The silence that followed the gunshot was absolute and profound, broken only by the sound of the bullet ricocheting off the canyon wall somewhere in the distance. Every man in the gang sat frozen in their saddles, suddenly aware that they were completely at the mercy of enemies, who could have killed them all in the time it had taken to fire a single warning shot. The demonstration of marksmanship had been casual, almost contemptuous in its precision, and it drove home the reality of their situation more effectively than any threat or ultimatum could have done. "The next shot will not miss," Captain Shanshan said quietly, his rifle already reloaded, and pointed at Jake Garrett's chest. "You have 30 seconds to begin your retreat, or you will discover what it means to face Modoc warriors in battle. I suggest you choose wisely." The war leader's voice carried the absolute certainty of a man who had made similar offers before, and followed through on his promises when they were refused. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Luna thought that Jake Garrett's pride and fury might overcome his survival instincts and drive him to attempt the kind of suicidal charge that would end with his death and the deaths of all his men. She could see the internal struggle playing out across his features as he weighed his options and found them all wanting. To retreat would be to admit defeat at the hands of people he had been taught to consider inferior. But to fight would be to die for the sake of wounded pride. Finally, Marcus Garrett made the decision for his older brother by spurring his horse toward the canyon entrance, his young face pale with terror as he fled from a confrontation that had escalated far beyond anything he was prepared to handle. "Jake, we gotta go," he called over his shoulder. "These ain't regular Indians, they're warriors, and they've got us dead to rights. We can come back with more men, but right now we're sitting ducks, one by one." The other gang members followed Marcus's lead, turning their horses and retreating toward the mouth of the canyon with whatever dignity they could salvage from the debacle. Snake Morrison was the last to break, his hand still hovering near his gun as he struggled with the humiliation of backing down from what should have been an easy victory. But eventually, even his nerve failed him, and he too turned his mount toward the relative safety of the open valley beyond. Jake Garrett sat alone in his saddle for several more seconds, his rifle still raised and his face twisted with the kind of impotent rage that came from being completely outmaneuvered by enemies he had underestimated. Luna could see the hatred burning in his eyes as he stared at her, and she knew with absolute certainty that this defeat would only make him more dangerous. When he finally returned with reinforcements and a plan designed to overcome the tactical advantages that the Modoc warriors had demonstrated. This was not the end of the conflict, but merely the end of the first round in what promised to be a much longer and bloodier war. "This ain't over," Garrett said finally, his voice thick with barely controlled fury. "I'll be back with enough men to burn these mountains down to bedrock, and when I do, I'll make sure every last one of you pays for this humiliation. Especially you," he added, pointing directly at Luna. "You brought this on yourself, and you're going to wish you died with your family before I'm through with you." With those words, Jake Garrett finally turned his horse and rode away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the canyon mouth with his pride in tatters and his carefully laid plans completely destroyed. But Luna felt no satisfaction in the victory, only a cold dread as she realized that the man who had murdered her family was still alive, still free, and still determined to make her pay for the crime of surviving his initial attack. The trap had succeeded brilliantly, but it had also ensured that the conflict would escalate to levels that might ultimately threaten the very survival of the Modoc people. As the sound of retreating hoofbeats faded into the distance, Toby appeared at Luna's side, his strong arms encircling her as she finally allowed herself to tremble with the delayed reaction to the terror she had just endured. "It's over," he murmured against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "You were magnificent, braver than any warrior I have ever known. My people will sing songs about your courage for generations to come." But even as Luna allowed herself to take comfort in Toby's embrace, she could not shake the feeling that their victory had come at a price they had not yet begun to calculate. Jake Garrett was not the kind of man who accepted defeat gracefully, and his threats had carried the weight of absolute conviction. The war for the sacred caves had begun in earnest, and Luna knew that the blood that would be spilled in the coming days would stain her hands as surely as if she had pulled the triggers herself, 3 days after the confrontation in Wakas. Valley, Luna stood at the edge of the sacred Kumash caves with a buckskin dress, replacing her torn traveling gown and traditional Modoc braids adorning her auburn hair. The transformation was more than merely physical. Something fundamental had shifted within her during the ritual ceremonies that had marked her formal acceptance into the tribe. Grandmother Takla had overseen the ancient rites with the solemnity of someone entrusting sacred knowledge to a stranger, and Luna felt the weight of that responsibility settling into her bones like winter cold. The cave entrance yawned before her like a mouth opened in eternal song, its depths disappearing into darkness that seemed to pulse with the accumulated spiritual energy of countless generations. Petroglyphs covered the surrounding rock walls, their intricate spirals and animal forms telling stories that predated written history by thousands of years. Luna traced one of the symbols with her fingertip, a stylized bear that seemed to watch her with ancient wisdom, and felt an electric connection to something larger than herself. The symbols speak of the first people, Toby explained softly, his voice carrying the reverence of someone who had grown up hearing these stories from his grandmother's lips. They tell how Kumash the Creator dove to the bottom of the world lake and brought up a handful of mud to make the earth, how he breathed life into the first animals and taught them to live in harmony with the land. His dark eyes reflected the morning sunlight filtering through the pine branches overhead. This place has been sacred to my people since the beginning of time itself, but their peaceful moment was shattered by the distant sound of approaching horses, dozens of them, moving with the disciplined coordination of a military formation rather than the chaotic pursuit they had witnessed 3 nights before. Luna's blood turned to ice as she realized that Jake Garrett had made good on his threats, returning with the kind of overwhelming force that could not be deterred by clever tactics or psychological warfare. Alone, Captain Marcus Holloway of the United States Cavalry rode at the head of the column, his blue uniform immaculate despite the long journey through mountain terrain. Behind him came 30 seasoned soldiers armed with the latest Spencer repeating rifles, followed by Jake Garrett and a dozen new recruits drawn from the roughest saloons and mining camps in the territory. The sight of federal troops accompanying known criminals should have been shocking, but Luna had learned enough about frontier politics to understand how easily money could corrupt even military officers. "Miss Ashford," Holloway called out as the column drew to a halt 50 yards from the cave entrance, his voice carrying the crisp authority of a West Point education and years of Indian fighting. "I am Captain Holloway, acting under orders from the territorial governor to investigate reports of white civilians being held against their will by hostile Indians. You will come with us immediately for your own protection." Luna stepped forward, her chin raised with the dignity that months of hardship had forged into an unbreakable steel core. "I am here by choice, Captain," she replied clearly, her voice carrying across the distance between them. "These people saved my life when others would have destroyed me. I am under no duress except that which you represent by bringing armed men to a sacred site." Toby moved to stand beside her, his hand resting casually on the war club at his belt. Around the cave perimeter, other Modoc warriors materialized from concealment with the fluid grace of men who had been born to this landscape. But Luna could see the grim calculation in their eyes as they assessed the odds: 30 professional soldiers with modern weapons against perhaps 15 defenders fighting on their home ground. The mathematics of survival had shifted dramatically since their victory in Waka's Valley, you see. Jake Garrett interjected with malicious satisfaction, spurring his horse closer to the military formation. "I told you these savages had brainwashed her, probably with their heathen rituals and devil worship. She ain't thinking clearly, Captain. That's why we need to get her away from them before they corrupt her completely." Captain Holloway studied Luna with calculating eyes, taking in her transformed appearance and the obvious bond between her and the Modoc warriors. "Miss Ashford, I'm afraid I have legal documents signed by the territorial authorities declaring you a ward of the state pending investigation into your mental competency. These people may have convinced you that they saved you, but our intelligence suggests you've been subjected to coercion, and possibly worse. The legal trap was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. By declaring Luna mentally incompetent, the authorities could justify taking her into custody regardless of her own wishes, while simultaneously delegitimizing any agreements or alliances she had made with the Modoc people. It was the kind of bureaucratic warfare that could accomplish through paperwork what bullets had failed to achieve through direct violence. "Your intelligence comes from a man who murdered my family," Luna said, her voice rising with indignation. "Jake Garrett is a criminal and a liar, and if you're taking his word over mine, then you're either a fool or a participant in his crimes." Holloway's expression hardened at the accusation. "I'll ask you to watch your tone, miss. I have my orders, and I intend to carry them out regardless of your personal feelings about Mr. Garrett. You will mount up and accompany us back to Sacramento, where proper medical authorities can evaluate your condition." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, with both sides understanding that the next words spoken would determine whether the confrontation could be resolved peacefully or would explode into the kind of violence that would leave the sacred caves stained with blood. Luna felt the weight of decision pressing down on her shoulders as she realized that her choice in this moment would affect not just her own fate, but the future of the Modoc people and their ancestral homeland. Chief Shanshan emerged from the cave depths, his weathered face grave with the knowledge of what was at stake. "Captain," he said formally, "this woman chose to join our people through the ancient rites of adoption. She is now Winema Lukash, woman of strong heart, and she is under our protection according to treaties signed by your own government. To take her by force would be an act of war against a sovereign nation, treaties that your people have repeatedly violated." Holloway replied coldly. "The Modoc nation forfeited its sovereign status when it chose to harbor fugitives and resist lawful authority. Miss Ashford is coming with us, and anyone who interferes will be considered an enemy combatant." The moment balanced on a knife's edge as Luna looked into Toby's eyes and saw her own desperate love reflected there. They had found each other. Across the vast divide of culture and circumstance, had built something precious and true in the midst of chaos and violence. But now the forces of law and greed were demanding that she choose between her new life and the safety of the people who had become her family. "I'll go with you," Luna said finally, the words torn from her throat like physical pieces of her soul. "But only if you give me your word as an officer that these people will be left in peace. No reprisals, no attempts to evict them from their ancestral lands. They saved my life, and I won't see them punished for their mercy." Captain Holloway nodded curtly. "You have my word, Miss Ashford. Now mount up. We have a long ride ahead of us." As Luna walked toward the waiting soldiers, she felt Toby's hand brush against hers one final time, a touch so brief that only she could detect it. But in that fleeting contact, she felt the promise of something that neither distance nor legal documents could destroy, the love that had transformed two broken souls into something stronger than the sum of their individual parts. The Sacramento Territorial Courthouse buzzed with anticipation as Judge Harrison Blackwood prepared to deliver his verdict in what newspapers had dubbed the trial of the century. Luna sat at the defendant's table in a simple gray dress, her Modoc braids replaced with a severe bun, but her eyes held depths that no amount of civilized clothing could disguise. Beside her sat attorney Samuel Morrison, a young Harvard graduate who had volunteered to defend her case despite the obvious damage it would do to his career. "The prosecution has painted Miss Ashford as a victim of savage manipulation," District Attorney Richard Pemberton declared in his closing argument, his expensive suit marking him as one of the political elite who profited from territorial expansion. "Look at her, once a refined lady, now defending the very savages who corrupted her natural feminine sensibilities through barbaric rituals no civilized woman could resist." The courtroom murmured approval as Pemberton positioned Luna as mentally incompetent, a narrative that allowed white society to dismiss native peoples as inherently dangerous while casting themselves as benevolent protectors. But Luna had learned too much about the true nature of that civilization to be impressed by its theatrical displays of moral superiority. Suddenly, the courtroom doors burst open with a crash that silenced Pemberton mid-sentence. Toby Riddle strode into the chamber with fluid grace, his traditional buckskins and war paint creating stark contrast to the civilized surroundings as he moved down the center aisle with absolute confidence. Behind him came Chief Shanshan, dressed in ceremonial regalia and carrying himself with the dignity of a sovereign leader. "Your Honor," Toby said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, "I am Toby Riddle of the Modoc Nation, and I invoke the right of witness and advocate under the Treaty of 1864, which guarantees our people the right to speak in defense of any tribal member facing legal proceedings." His English was flawless, his bearing that of an educated man comfortable in both worlds, and Luna felt her heart soar as she realized he had found a legal loophole. Judge Blackwood consulted hastily with his clerk, clearly flustered. The Treaty of 1864 remained technically valid law, and Toby's invocation created a legal crisis that could not be dismissed. "Mr. Riddle, you may speak, but any disruption will result in immediate arrest." "Thank you, Your Honor," Toby replied with perfect courtesy, moving to stand before the jury. "Gentlemen, you have been told that Luna Ashford is a victim of savage deception. But I ask you to consider that she is exactly what she appears to be, a courageous woman who chose to align herself with people who showed her more honor than her own kind ever did." The transformation in the courtroom was electric. This was not the savage white mythology had prepared the jury to expect, but a man whose intelligence challenged every assumption about the inherent superiority of their civilization. "The prosecution claims our ceremonies are tools of mental control," Toby continued, meeting each juror's gaze. "But what are your marriage vows if not ceremonies binding two people through sacred commitment? What is baptism if not ritual marking spiritual transformation?" His questions struck at white cultural hypocrisy, using their own traditions to legitimize Modoc practices. Luna felt tears streaming as she listened to Toby defend not just her choices, but the entire worldview that had given her life meaning. He was risking everything, his safety, his people's neutrality, to stand in this hostile place and speak truth with the eloquence of a born orator. Luna Ashford chose to become Winema Lukash through the same process by which any of you might become citizens of a new nation, Toby declared, his voice rising with controlled intensity. "She studied our ways, proved her courage, and was formally adopted through ceremonies older than your constitution. To declare her mentally incompetent for this choice is to deny the fundamental principle your nation was founded on, the right of free people to determine their destiny." The legal brilliance was undeniable. By framing Luna's adoption as equivalent to naturalization, Toby had turned the prosecution's case inside out. To rule against Luna would undermine the entire foundation of American citizenship. Before District Attorney Pemberton could object, Captain Marcus Holloway entered with a document that would change everything. "Your Honor, I carry orders from General William Tecumseh Sherman directing that all charges against Miss Ashford be dropped immediately and that she be released to whichever community she chooses." The revelation that the commanding general had personally intervened sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Sherman had discovered evidence of Jake Garrett's massive land fraud and systematic persecution of Native peoples. The general's intervention wasn't sympathy, but cold pragmatism. He needed stable tribal relationships to maintain frontier peace. As the courtroom erupted in chaos, Luna rose and walked directly to Toby, ignoring shouted protests. When she reached him, she took his hands and spoke words that rang above the tumult. "I choose the Modoc Nation. I choose you. I choose the life we can build together in the mountains where the old spirits still dance." 6 months later, spring brought new life to the hidden valley that had become Luna's true home. She stood at the Cumish Cave's entrance with Toby beside her and their infant son sleeping in her arms. The child's dark eyes held flecks of green that reminded everyone of his mother's courage. Chief Shanshan had declared the boy a bridge between worlds, a living symbol that two peoples might share the land in peace. What will you tell him about where he comes from? Toby asked softly, his arm encircling Luna's waist as they watched sunset over peaks that had witnessed so much history. I'll tell him that love is stronger than fear. Luna replied, her voice carrying hard-won wisdom. I'll tell him that home isn't a place you're born to, but a place you choose to build with people who see your true worth. And I'll tell him that sometimes the greatest courage isn't fighting enemies, but choosing to trust those who offer something better. The wind carried pine and wildflower scents as Modoc children played in meadows below, their laughter echoing off ancient stone walls. Luna had traded herself for protection and found something far more precious, a love that transcended every boundary human prejudice could construct, and a future where her son would grow knowing he belonged to both worlds without being limited by either.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.